someone, the great John Goodman, President and CEO, National Center for Policy Analysis in Dallas, Texas. And we will link to this as we link to all things on marklevinshow.com. He writes today, economists on the left and right are expressing concern, in some cases alarm, over the fiscal health of the U.S. government. Currently, we're running a deficit equal to about 10% of the gross domestic product. But the government is still able to borrow at 3%. No other country in the world could do that. And we may not be able to do it much longer. We may be living in the calm before the storm. As in the case of Greece and possibly all of Southern Europe, international investors may decide that we have neither the will nor the ability to pay back our debtors. In that case, the government's borrowing costs will soar. And keep in mind, Obama's telling us, you can do without. We're going to take more and more of your income, and you need to borrow less and less. Meanwhile, he and these politicians do exactly the opposite. Goodman writes, how bad are things? How much of a problem is health care? Can we tax our way out of it? My own view is that the crisis is going to begin at the bottom and rise to the top. Already we've seen some local governments declare bankruptcy. Expect more of that. In the next several years, I believe some very large cities are going to announce that they can't pay their bills. State governments will be next. Whereas local governments can declare bankruptcy, state governments can only default. A default by the state of California seems almost inevitable. But is it conceivable that the U.S. government could default? Actually, he writes, yes. Every projection shows the gap between spending and tax revenues rising through time. And the problem at the federal level is basically the same as it is at the state and local levels. We made promises, many promises of benefits for retirees that we were unwilling to fund. And to the extent we did fund them, I'll add, the money was stolen. 2 years ago, the first of the baby boomers started claiming early retirement under Social Security. Next year, they will start signing up for Medicare. Before they are through, 78 million people will quit working, quit paying taxes, quit contributing to our retirement system, and start drawing benefits instead. And we're not ready for them. Not in Social Security or Medicare, Medicaid. By not ready, I mean we have put no money aside to pay for the benefits that baby boomers think they've been promised. And in terms of short-term cash flow, the Obama administration is forecasting that federal spending will be at 25% of gross domestic product by 2020, while revenues will be less than 20%, to keep the deficit at no more than 3% of GDP, not 0, but 3%. An Urban Institute Brookings tax analysis suggests that tax rates must rise 40%. They must rise 40% in 2015. That's 5 years from now for those who can't add. That means the bottom 10% rate would have to climb to 14%, and the top 35% would have to go to 48%. I guess these are the tough decisions Obama's talking about. He calls this reform, by the way, when it has nothing to do with reform. 48%. And, folks, this is why people are scrambling to try and declare as much income this year as possible as opposed to future years, because of the massive increases in tax rates that are coming. And if you're paying a 45% federal income tax rate in 5 years, let's just say you live in California and you're paying 8 and 7.75% state tax, that's almost 57%. Then you're paying local taxes. You're paying taxes on your car, for instance, and so forth. You're paying 65% of your income. Now, are you free when you're paying 65% of your income to government at all levels? I'm just curious. Do you think you're free? Let me put it in simpler terms. If you're spending 65% of your workday working for the politicians and the bureaucrats at all levels of governments, are you free? Stick it to those people, though, Mark. Those are little businessmen and women. Pizza parlors. Dry cleaners. Mechanics. You're not sticking it to anybody. You're sticking it to yourselves. And should they be less free than somebody who earns more than they do, or somebody who earns nothing and is given money that somebody else earned? He goes, the problem is not just a federal federal problem, John Goodman writes. State and local governments have unfunded retiree obligations of $2 trillion or more. Private companies have made defined benefit promises that are also underfunded. And 1/3 of the baby boomers have an employer promise of post-retirement health care, almost none of which has been funded. It's scary. Obama has appointed a commission on the federal deficit, the National Commission on Fiscal Responsibility and Reform. Although nothing is certain, many believe a value-added tax will figure prominently in the proposed solutions. But is a VAT tax or any other tax really an answer to our problems? Professor Lawrence Kotlikoff and his colleagues have modeled the U.S. economy in the middle of a world economy to project the consequences of various policy proposals. For example, suppose we continue on the current path and fund the growth of entitlement spending with a VAT tax or a payroll tax or a consumption tax. What will the future look like for the United States as well as Europe? Well, 2 points. In the United States, the average tax on wage income will rise from 40.6% today. That's a 15.3% payroll tax plus a 15% income tax plus state and local taxes to 55% by 2030 and 62% by 2050. The tax rates of this magnitude would be enormously harmful to the economy and probably uncollectible. And note that these are average tax rates. Marginal tax rates would be much higher. We're reaching a point that in the lifetime of some of the people listening to this program, we could go back to a 90, 91% tax rate. And not just for multimillionaires. Remember what I've always said, how they dumb down what a millionaire is by just simply changing the category. Now, if you're a single person who makes $200,000 a year, say a small business person, a young person, and you make $200,000 a year, gross, you're a millionaire. Congratulations. That number will go down as the government tries to figure out ways to fund itself. You know, I'm going to be honest with you. I don't know if we're at a crossroads or if we've already walked through that crossroads. Time will tell. But this is why I have such contempt for this government under these Democrats and these leftists. This is why I have such contempt for activists, judges, and justices. And this is why I have such contempt for people who think we need more of this, who still can't awaken and see what's going on around them, and who obviously don't give a damn about their children and grandchildren, let alone their country. This is the height of irresponsibility. Call it whatever you want. Statism, Marxism, socialism, fascism, whatever. It's destructive of this magnificent society. And I say, as I say all that, and for what? What's the point of this? Why would you take the most magnificent society which has ever evolved on the face of this earth and in 18 months destroy it? And in 18 months destroy it. And all we get are these press events with Obama saying, I and me and I. Well, who was it? Pat Riley, who once said, you're going to drown in Lake Me. That's all Obama talks about himself, because that's all he cares about. How he looks, how he's portrayed, what his legacy is. And we pay a heavy price for that, just as they do in Venezuela and Cuba, just as they do in European socialist countries. The people pay a very heavy price for that. I don't do this often, but I met a couple of friends of mine for dinner, and one of them brought along a fellow who's been here a year or two from Britain. And he had a real tough time getting his head around the notion of individual liberty. What about this group? What about this group? As if we don't have a massive welfare state, and as if they don't have one in Britain. And yet he's in this country because he feels that the government obstructs his ability to succeed, and he wants to make more money. This is the hypocrisy of the left, the idiocy of the left. What's good for him is good for him and only him. These centralized, top-down systems can't work, and they don't work because they can't work. The people at the top can't possibly have the information necessary to make the right decisions. More often than not, they are political decisions. And this notion about doing what's in the public interest or for the public good, quote-unquote, they don't know what's in the public interest or what's good for the public. They take their policy biases and they seek to impose them on the rest of us. Obama doesn't know a damn thing about me or you. He doesn't live my life and he doesn't live your life. And yet he seems to think he knows all about it, doesn't he? He knows who's good and who's bad, who can be trusted and who can't, who's on the good side and who's on the bad side. He doesn't view us as human beings. He doesn't view us as free citizens. He doesn't even care. And don't dare question the man. First of all, you can't because he doesn't expose himself to a lot of questions. But then when you do, he gets offended. By the way, so does Biden. Biden, a dumbass, calling a guy a smartass. Oh, and you folks at Media Matters, I love it when you take what I say and spread it all over the earth. I really do. It's very enjoyable. Oh, and you're still violating the tax code, and one day I'm sure that'll catch up with you. You're not a non-profit, non-partisan charitable organization. You know what you are, and I know what you are. But keep it up. We can use it. Spread it around the world. We'll be right back.
Mark